And we are live. Hello and welcome, everyone. To start with, this is streaming on YouTube, and then I'm gonna download this and post this on Substack, Spotify, uh, everywhere where you and your mother can hear it. Um, and I'm joined by honestly one of the most interesting fellows on Substack. Uh, and why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Well, Vesirma, Ahula Dunya. Good afternoon, everyone. Smisha, Ethan Sabatella. I'm Ethan Sabatella. I write and run Shenanigans Kollajiv on Substack. I am a writer of primarily nowadays cosmic horror and semi-historical, sword and sorcery, fantasy fiction with a little bit like more dedicated historical fiction in there, based on sort of Celtic studies. So
Mhm.
any language, culture, history, mythology around like Ireland and Scotland specifically. Um, and in addition to writing fiction, I also sort of do my own like scholarly research into the myths and folklore of British Isles, Ireland, a little bit into Gaul, but
Yeah, I've noticed.
yeah, yeah. But very excited to be
Well,
on the show today, and thanks for having me.
it's a pleasure. I hope to have you again. I will warn you again because you're. I have to admit, as I'm getting old, but I'm I'm aging. I'm taking more and more of an interest in the same field, but I'm like so many years behind you. So um, this is where I'm looking at your Substack and yourself as a bit of a mentor here because people have no idea the wealth of folklore, mythology, linguistics of the three Celtic nations of Europe. That is to say, France, Scotland, and Ireland, which, um, at least it seems to me, no other nations ever kind of, at least after Rome, had such a massive impact on the whole of European history. And yeah, that's because I tried to take my master's in Scottish history, so of course I'm biased towards the most westerly Celtic parts. But how did you get into Celtic studies?
So I guess the earliest like time where I actually encountered like the mention of like the Celts in terms of like um
Mhm.
this like idea of them as like these it, sort of like comparatively primitive tribes that encountered or like fought against the Roman Empire was in middle school when we were going through our Roman history class, and sort of like around sixth or seventh grade,
Mhm.
and um, I just remember sort of my teacher talking about them. And I thought they sounded pretty interesting, but it wasn't until my family had made a trip to Scotland back in 2013, where we actually visited the battlefield of Culloden, um, in the it was in the Highlands, so in Culloden Moor, where enemy sort of Outlander fans probably have heard you know the actors describe Culloden as the place where Highland Gaelic culture met its end, sort of. But you know, but you'll look around today and see that like Scotland's making huge efforts to try and revive it and stuff. But in terms of where like sort of I come into play there, I was just in the visitor center bookstore, and I found this little tiny book of Gaelic. I'm not probably on my shelf over there somewhere, but this little tiny book of Gaelic or well Scottish words and phrases. It included like a section on the Scots language, which is spoken in the Highlands, and a section on Gaelic, or sorry, Scots is spoken in the Lowlands, and it's sort of
Yep.
like a descendant of Middle English or like medieval English.
The
And
height of Scots literature is the Bruce poem,
yeah, yeah,
which
yep,
I'm translating into English and French.
nice, nice,
Yeah,
yep,
but it's taking a lot of effort, a lot of
mm,
Googling, and a lot of. I've been doing this for a few years, and I'm still only at a few pages in. But it's been on and off. But
yeah,
your effort, like Gaelic, is just so much harder. But it has so much literature behind it.
yeah, yeah. It is. It's the um like if you look at the Irish literature specifically, like Scotland, like Gaelic Scotland has its own corpus of literature, but like in but if we're talking like post Roman era literature, Ireland probably has like the most, or like European
Mhm.
literature specifically, Ireland has pretty much the most uh, like literature, or like the largest vernacular literature in like early medieval Europe. They just pretty much wrote like crazy, and there's even the book how the Irish saved civilization. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, but it sort of like
I know it.
describes the it describes the basically how like all the Irish scholars basically like preserved all the classical knowledge and stuff from the fall of Rome. But um,
We know that it was the Irish and the Greeks who worked hard to preserve. I only
mm,
mention the Greeks because in the East they were the bulwark of Christendom, pushing
right,
back the Muslim hordes so that Europe could have time to rebuild. But then, the Irish with Dagobah and the Merovingian, they bring a lot of the learning with them into Francia, where, in time, Charlemagne will really have everything recopied, like Aristotle and whatnot. And so, yeah, like it's really interesting that sorry, but the Irish preserved things like the Tain, which is did I pronounce that right?
Twain,
The Yeah, the Tain. Let me
Twain,
see.
yeah,
Tain. Let me see. I think I've got my copy, my newly arrived copy here. Oh, here it is. I got my El Cid, my just recently, and the Tain. No, Twain Bo Quelling. I did not pronounce it right.
Twain Bo Colinga,
Oh, Twain Bo Culling. Oh, the cattle raid of Cooley.
yep,
Uh, I had been waiting months for this.
yeah,
Um, it's an amazing read, and
yeah,
I've got a PDF, a Kindle, and that copy now.
nice,
But
nice.
the um, I need to get a copy in French because some of it's going to fly till I get a French copy and I crack that open. And I go, oh, that
Yeah,
makes.
yeah, yeah. There's
But
there is actually a scholarly journal in like about Celtic studies that is in French, or at least like the name it's in French. It's like a, Review Celtic. I think it is. Yeah, Review Celtic, and like that's and like a lot of like Celtic studies is actually in French and German. So that'd be yeah, very good resource as well. But
yeah, well, that'd probably be my first
yeah,
recourse
hmm
because I've seen Revue Celtic. I have to admit, when I was studying for my master's, I relied on it for
mm,
a lot of my Scottish studies and whatnot, and Welsh studies, because it was just easier to just go through there. But then I didn't have the money for my master's, so I crashed hard. They told me, "You're doing great. Get out. You don't
mhm,
have the money."
yeah,
It's like, oh yeah, you should have a scholarship. You think I got a shot? No, Get Out. It's like,
uh,
yeah. So, but still, this stuff is important because um, it's um, language is culture, and so long as Scotland and Ireland perceive themselves through the lens of the English language, there's something that there's like a barrier. I think I don't know what you think of that idea. There's a barrier between them and their true heritage, which is Gaelic.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a you know, I've definitely like looked into that a bit, not just through like the sort of um, I guess like the literature from like the Celtic Twilight with like Yeats and all that sort of
Mm.
uh, pseudoscientific isn't the word, but like that sort of like rhetoric where like they're um,
Well,
talking about like trying to like preserve heritage and stuff when like Yeats was like very much part of sort of the like upper class that was even though he was like Irish like Irish born and ethnically Irish in some ways, he was still like very much a like rich kid and didn't do all of his like due diligence with like folklore and stuff, but when like with a lot more sort of like current movements now that we have like a lot more visibility on like actual like native Irish and Gaelic speakers. Like the biggest example that comes to mind for me at least is the rap group Kneecap. They're a like Irish and Irish speaking rap group who like recently they came under a lot of heat for like protesting sort of the war going on of like Israel versus Palestine, and they're
oh, okay.
yeah, and they were sort of shut down at Coachella, or like at least their like stream was cut at Coachella for like you know showing their support to Palestine, and like a lot of what they're sort of trying to do is help like kind of reclaim, but also like kind of modernize a lot of the sort of like notions of like the Irish language and culture. Is that like it's still possible to like live in the present while also and like still be like kind of hip, but also like still have a strong sense of like who like they are as like Irish people and like Irish speakers, like um just sort of trying to stick it to like the you know lingering like colonialism in Ireland, and also like trying to not just promote that idea in Ireland, but also like promote it elsewhere where like people might have come under um, you know uh, sort of like oppressors or
Well, I don't think.
colonization. So
Yeah, I'll be honest. To me, colonization by the French, for example, into North America, I'm like, yeah, damn straight, it did nothing but good. Colonization by the English, somewhat mixed bag, but I kind of align more with the Europeans than the natives, more because, well, that's the heritage. But and I view it as, well, I'm Canadian, so I my loyalty is also to that, which was a Anglo-Celtic project. But I'd say for Ireland, it's a very like Ireland had a, like you said, a very rich culture, and um, it the colonization in Ireland was never something that seemed to yield any good. You know what I mean? It
right,
like the Emerald Isle already had a thriving culture, a language. If from the perspective, let's say, if you have to Christianize a place, what the hell are you doing? Like Ireland's already Christian, more Christian than England was at the time of the conquest of Ireland. Um, and so, like, my only point is, for me, I think peeling back the centuries for Ireland and Scotland is important in the context of I don't know about modernity and whatnot, but this is the heritage. You know, you gotta honor and treasure it because um, millions of Irish and Scots did die for this, and it just seems respectful to them and to honor them because, um, like, where what would there even be in Ireland or Scotland without this language and this culture? No. Um, I don't know what you think of that view that it's worth preserving, and I'd even say I think that the English have in England have well, they once had a pretty good education. I've met some English who can speak like French and English pretty well, but I've always kind of thought that maybe it might be good for them to also learn um, the Irish language. Since the Irish are learning English, you know, maybe the English could meet them halfway. I'm not saying colonize England with the Irish. I just mean I don't know if that sounds weird. Like just meeting this halfway mark between the two so that you know, both cultures and civilizations thrive in the British Isles because long before the Anglo-Saxons showed up, you had the Bretons
Mm.
of Britannia and whatnot. So I guess, but I'm also a Celt, so like I look at well, 70% of my ancestors are from France and Scotland, so course, I'm looking at it like, well, this is what's best because I look at my tribes and I look to them. Um, but because we humans are very tribal by nature, but this need not mean, you know, there needs to be conflict um, because there's benefits for the English because, like, well, I once heard a bit of a Celtic mass online and I was moved. It was very beautiful, like the just the music and the singing and whatnot. Of course, that I forget it was for a documentary, and they just showed a bit of a lady singing Irish in the Western Isles of Scotland, and it, you know, like that was my first year of university when it's like I didn't know what research I wanted to do. I just hear that and just, I'm entranced. But I went into Japanese studies, but you know, I was still, you know, like I still made sure to back up my Japanese studies with some Scottish studies and whatnot because it was a good, you know, secondary thing to look into. But um, okay, so and you tend to write a lot of cosmic horror and um, uh, also you said history, but what kind of historic fiction is it of Ireland and Scotland?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my main sword and sorcery series
Mhm.
on Eka McLeod and Connor Rose Strang. Um, that's what the sort of current serial I'm writing right now until this August. That's what I'm working on. It's it takes place in um, Ireland and Scotland, but it's kind of
Mm.
different in the sense that um, it's like like I would probably call it like pseudo historical, where it takes place in a real uh, place, and it takes place at a particular time that's like relative to our own timeline, but there are sort of like details that are a little bit weird about it. Like they're like it's not exactly sort of like a one for one thing where it's like this is like this is where they're at, like in a sort of like traceable era. It's in a sort of a more like i- not exactly like in between time, just more of like what I would probably taking from the Conan movie, and say sort of like a an age undreamed of, where it's not where it's in a time that technically, like logically didn't exist, but is in one that sort of like incorporates stuff from different points in sort of
So
like historical timeline that we have. But
is it like some of what Howard did, like Bran Morn and whatnot?
a little bit. I definitely took a bit of inspiration from there, and like when I was sort of like trying to plan out like an actual more formal
Mhm.
timeline a couple of years ago, I
Incredible.
did almost follow a little bit of the sort of like Hyperborean age timeline that he had written up, but then I just at one point gave up trying to um, categorize it into one exact place and just said, this is my setting. It is, in Scotland and Ireland. There's some weird stuff about it. It's not historically accurate, but this is a
You're
story that
having fun.
I feel like telling. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm. I've seen some of your reviews of stuff and your analysis and whatnot. Honestly, your knowledge of Celtic vastly surpasses mine and impresses me. I'm sure your stories must be just riveting with all the details and whatnot. It's but the cosmic horror. How? What kind of cosmic horror? Because I know, like, I don't know much about that subgenre of horror, but I know like Lovecraft was his kind of cosmic horror stuff was different from Howard's, for
right.
example. So I might be a dunce in the subgenre, but so I'll beg you to break it down for someone like me.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, with Lovecraft specifically, obviously you have like the Cthulhu mythos or like Yog-Sothoth as he originally called it. Cthulhu mythos was like a later thing that people thought of, but I guess the easiest way that I would probably describe in order just to like for sake of brevity, the best way I could describe the difference between like Lovecraft's cosmic horror and Howard's cosmic horror is like Lovecraft's is more of, and I kind of use this term in sort of like the most literal sense that I can, other not just for like the sake of just saying like, oh, that's what it's like. This like Lovecraft's stories are a little bit more like a like fever dream. Like it's there's
Yeah.
this like sort of like dream
What
like
I meant,
logic that goes into it.
what I meant was,
Yeah.
which one is yours more like?
Oh, right. Yeah. The um I'd say, I try to tend a little bit more towards Lovecraft, but in terms of just
Mm,
like what I try to aim for, but sometimes it veers a little bit too Howard. I, honestly like taking a little bit of elements from both. Um, honestly, just having that like more existential, weird kind of ideas that Lovecraft had versus like the actual sort of like more uh, human element that Howard usually brings into it, where it's like there's obviously like a human character encountering these things, and you get to see what a actual human being could try and do to maybe try and combat these things if that's even possible. But yeah,
okay. So, and now I'll just ask real quick about Howard. Would you
yeah,
consider him more a Celtic author or American author? Just out of curiosity.
that's a good question. I mean, yeah, he definitely had like a really huge Celtic phase, and definitely, and like there's definitely elements of his storytelling that do sort of echo traditional like Irish or at least like
Mhm.
traditions from like Scots Irish immigrants from like from the South at least.
Because he
So
boasted
like
a lot of his Scots Irish heritage.
mhm.
Like I remember finding dozens of his letters where he's just bragging about how Irish he is by
Yeah.
descent. But on the other hand, he brags about Texas,
Mhm.
and he's very much proud of his Texan heritage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and while he was like very sort of like fascinated with like his Irish heritage and like themes about that kind of stuff. It seemed like at least like towards the end of his life, he was or like as he developed it seemed like he was really more of like a American author in a lot of ways where yes, he does sort of like have the Celtic or like the Irish or like Celtic elements, but at heart it seemed like he was very much a um to sort of use a stereotype like big loud American, where he was really trying to sort of or did really try to embody that like sort of spirit of at least his corner of America. So and since if you want to like use a melting pot analogy with like Americans, you can also argue that like the Irish part of him is just as important as like the American part, where you have like the Irish hyphen American um, uh, sort of a qualifier to just sort of uh, add to that like idea of him being like a just a great storyteller in general. So
He was brilliant.
yeah,
Do you do you think the no? I remember reading up about how even the ancient Romans had theories about why the Irish and the Gauls were such good storytellers. And do you think, like, one common theory I've run into is it's just the nature of the Celts that they tell good stories, good tall tales and whatnot. Do you think that had anything to do with it, or was it more um, like? Yes, I know it's particular to Howard because only he could write what he wrote.
right.
Genius that he was. But do you think some of the Irishness or something you know allowed him to tap all of that?
I mean, I think that it's not in terms of them being such good storytellers. It's not so much as like it's because like they're this people, therefore they're good storytellers. I think it's more so that they really place a emphasis on oral
Storytelling.
storytelling. Yeah, and oral storytelling and like oral and like recitation stuff. Even when they um, had the even when they had the ability to write and like they like as far back as like the Romans, they were able to like actually communicate with them in Greek and like actually write stuff in Greek. But all
Mhm.
of the I guess quote unquote sacred knowledge or like stories, lore, mathematics, philosophy, information like that. All of that was pretty much just memorized and recited off the top of their head, and even into the 20th century, you have you know traditional folk communities um, in
Telling
the
very traditional stories and whatnot.
yeah yeah.
Yeah.
So it's thousands of years of just these of this like oral storytelling tradition that just eventually, um,
Mm.
I guess, molds a storyteller into being able to just recite stories just at the drop of a hat.
Mm. Yeah, I do agree that it's more the way the culture's developed and whatnot. Um, I was once friends with an Englishman who said that um, the French love to win, but that the French inherited the culture of the Romans and of the Celts, and that um, the English inherited the desire for conquest. I'm not sure what I think of that thought, but what he proposed was that um, the reason, like that all three of the Celtic nations are just um, were great warriors. Now he thought, the English were better. I disagree, but I do think that the Celts seem to have, since the earliest times, um, there was a fascination with storytelling that really, like, even poetry. Like, I'm looking at this Bruce poem, and it's I love this thing, but it's what is it? Almost seven, no, almost 800 pages of just verse, and just it's just this grand sweeping poem, and it's something that like I think there is something to our people, that we are fascinated by stories, but I do, on the other hand, think it's also something about certain individuals in our culture. Um, I don't know if that's a crazy notion, but I also tend to think that I don't know what you'll think of this. I don't tend to think of it as there's a Western civilization so much as there are Western civilizations in the plural, and that to an extent, France, Ireland, and Scotland kind of share more, you know what I mean, in common. And French civilization is particular apart from Irish and Scotch civilization, but there's still enough similarities. Oh, and I don't know what you'll think of this, but I also found out genetically the French are closer to the Scots than they are to the English or the Germans for the most part, and I thought that was interesting. I don't know what you make of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I don't really um, know a
Keep
whole
up with
lot
that.
about genetics and
Okay.
the
Well, it
you know
seems like
the
the yeah, it seems there
just
was some close links in the medieval period between the three nations. But
yeah.
I also remember a a Scottish professor once saying, "You take the map of Ireland and Scotland, you turn it, and this is how the Irish and the Scots perceive the world." Going, they didn't look south to England; they looked between Ireland and Scotland,
Mhm.
and this is how they perceived the world, um, as being about those two regions. Um, but anyways, as to your sword and sorcery world, um, is um, so when did you first start writing it?
Um, let's see the earliest actual story that full story that I wrote for it was in um, sophomore year of college. I was in a creative writing course, and I had this idea for um, or for these characters, Ekin and Connor, and uh, I wanted to do I knew that I wanted to write a story with them in it, and at the time I was like for some reason just fascinated with the idea of the Orkney Isles, and sort of how
Mm,
the Vikings came in there as well, and just sort of created this sort of um, this like very distinct area of um,
Scotland.
y- yeah, Scotland, even though it wasn't like necessarily incorporated into the Kingdom of
Mm,
Scotland until quite a
not
bit later.
yeah.
But yeah, but I thought that would be a really interesting place to sort of set this um, to sort of like set their, or at least like this part of their adventures where they weren't just encountering stuff that they were uh, familiar with, even though that Ekin, his clan is sort of descended from Norse invaders, so the MacLeods of Skye. In my stories, I use
Mhm.
the oceanic name of Selma for the Isle of Skye, and um, so. Uh, but yeah, that was pretty much the first time that I sort of like showed them to a group of other people, and the
Yeah.
first time that they appeared in print was with the it's probably safe to say it's like now kind of defunct, even though they had a sort of like quick um, sort of special that they did, Broadswords and Blasters. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, magazine. They ran um, for I think about 13 issues, and um, we're sort of a indie publication. Their stuff is still on Amazon, I'm pretty sure, but they appeared in
They
one of
printed
their.
you?
Sorry.
They printed one of your stories?
Yeah, it was
Wow.
yeah, it was called the Pole House. It was in, I forget which issue it was in. I think it yeah, I forget which one it was in, but yeah, that was the first time that was the second sale that I ever made, and the first time that Ekin and Connor appeared in print. So that was
That's cool.
fun. Yeah.
Oh my god. Brag. Just you got the full bragging rights for that because Moses is cool. That must have been quite the heady feeling.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was definitely really fun. It was also kind of a cool point because that also coincided with the publication of that issue coincided with the Game of Thrones finale. So I was able to just sort of say, did the finale disappoint you? Well, there's better stories in here that you can read. So
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well, I've seen your writing. Yeah, you can brag that. You can brag that you're better. Um, because, well, as I always tell people, it's easy for Martin to have sold as many copies when you have the entire media of the entire world shouting at people, buy this guy, buy this guy, buy this guy.
mhm,
Like you could grab the most poorly written book out there and sell millions of copies that way. But so it doesn't mean that it's in terms of quality better than, let's say, Ethan Sabatella's books. Because if you were to put the same, if you were to put $100 million behind you in marketing you, you'd sell as many or more. So you know what I mean?
right, yeah,
It's yeah, it's like, but although I think that honestly, a lot of what I see on your Substack is a lot cooler because there's all those linguistics and whatnot and folklore that you analyze, and it's just, uh, it's really fascinating. Um, and it makes me want to rush out the Bruce stuff, but it's just I have to go slow, point
mhm,
by point, because I'm not fluent in Scots.
right,
Um, and I've got a Scottishman on tap, and he occasionally says, "No, that's a German term." So there's some Germanic or
mhm,
Deutsch in there. So I have no idea how that gets into Scots. So I have to also crack open German and English dictionaries.
mhm.
Um, but in terms of Irish literature, what's your favorite? Like,
Um, let's see. I mean, the in terms of like at least the story that I read the most, just for like scholarly reasons and also um, just in terms of what I physically like talking the parts about Kukelin's boyhood deeds since that was part of my master's thesis. But I
ooh,
guess the only other thing that I could probably compare it could say is would probably be my but that would probably like more than that would be stories from the Finn cycle or the Fenian cycle, as it's sometimes called. You got to be careful about saying Fenian in Ireland, but in that story has like Finn McCool, his son Oshin, and his grandson Oscar, and also roped a little bit in of their stories into my master's thesis as well, since that
ooh.
those stories specifically deal a lot with the idea of coming of age and um, sort of the progression from just boys into men since
Mhm. Ancient times.
but the theory of or one of the theories about what sort of Finn's group were is that they were um, that probably likely a um, sort of remnant of a sort of specific group of sort of like quote unquote legal outlaws that would basically be like composed of just like young nobility that would just sort of like go out into the woods to like learn sort of like survival skills, how to be
Yeah.
sort of self-sustaining, and also just like learn like general etiquette of like how to conduct yourself in sort of like a paramilitary setting, or like in a just sort of like general
Oh yeah.
setting. You have this hierarchy of like aristocratic warriors where like you need to know your place as like as like either a like inferior or like a equal to them as well.
Subordinate
uh,
and subordinate and liege. How's that for wording?
uh, what are you referring to? uh,
No, I was just offering an alternative wording to inferior and superior,
uh,
subordinate and superior.
yeah, so yeah, subordinate and superior, that's yeah, probably the term, or like the like younger or like elder sort of, or something like that.
Mm,
But
cool.
yeah, no, it was fascinating to sort of like look into sort of the like societal sort of like subtext of those stories, as
Yeah.
like seeing you know um and like also
Is
like the
your
linguistic part of it as well, because like something that like the English translations don't really sort of show is that like when a hero kind of like makes a transition from like one part of boyhood into like sort of like older
man?
boyhood, not like quite manhood, there's like specific
Oh,
wordings that's used for it, that like we just don't really sort of like get in English. But yeah,
mhm. Maybe from boyhood to youth to manhood.
yeah, there's yeah, I mean there's, at least in my research, there was like actually at least like two other two other stages between like young boyhood um that came
Mm.
like
Yeah.
before manhood. So there's like um there's a little boy, then there was like this boy that was like old enough to take arms, but like still wasn't like old enough to like make his own decisions, or like really like have claim to like
Oh,
anything at all. And then there was like
yeah. Yeah.
um
It's like enfant écuyer, which is to say child squire or
mhm,
young squire, jeune
yeah,
écuyer, um, vieux écuyer, older squire, and then adulte, adult, something like that.
yeah, that's yeah, it's probably even a better way to to sort of describe it,
Okay.
just like
I don't know.
yeah,
But okay. But congrats, anyways, about the Masters. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah,
Ah,
thanks.
man. I have to admit, I broke down sobbing like a baby when I didn't get my scholarship and I ran out of money for the Masters. It was hard.
Yeah,
Um, well, but my Masters would have been thesis would have been around. Uh, well, there's the Tigernack annals and all the other annals about Macbethid. I would have
mhm,
wanted to write about how like the marriage of king and the to the land and the perception of what Macbethid was and how there's 15 years of good harvest are attributed to him. This is this and other. I would have had to have read the time. I didn't. No, I was still gathering sources, and just the idea is the way the Irish and the Scots looked at kingship, and even the French at one time was very different from the way the English did, and like the harvest and whatnot. Um, Macbeth is a case in point. They attributed it to his good reign that there's so much, there's so many good harvests. I'm not saying that's the reality, but this is how the perception was back then, and that this is a major part of kingship, and that the Celtic kingship is about marriage to the land and whatnot, and to the tribe, whereas and welding the two together. Whereas with the English, it was a very different kind of kingship, Um, but I never got to complete that thesis, um, which I don't know if it would have been any good, but um, I did. I had only written a few paragraphs, and I had made the illusion Lion King borrows more from this perception. For example, like with Simba, with a good king like Simba, you have the land which is healthy. Scar, the
Mhm.
land is not healthy because good king, bad king affects the landscape, which is perceived as legitimizing or illegitimizing the king. So, like, if you have a good harvest, the king is legitimate. If it's not, well, you got to start asking some questions. Um, it was also an attempt to try to clean up Macbeth's reputation because Shakespeare really trounced it. Um, and I always kind of liked Macbeth. Um, but your thesis sounds way more interesting. I will admit, way more interesting. Um, and it's evident, you got to put in more research and more uh, effort into it and whatnot. So, whereabouts did you do your master's?
I went to St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish,
Ooh,
Nova Scotia. So, um, which,
ooh.
yeah, it was yeah, a great time. I really miss it there since that was probably the place
Mhm.
where I was able to get probably the most Gaelic exposure. Um,
Oh,
yeah, since there was like um, not only were my professors fluent in Scottish Gaelic, but a lot of the students were um, kids whose families like were from descended from like really like old
the
settlers from
Gales.
from Scotland, so they had been speaking Gaelic pretty much like their entire lives for like generations and generations ever since they came
Oh,
over. So
that's so cool.
yeah.
That is so freaking cool. Um, sorry that until I met you, I didn't know Canada had such a large Gaelic population. I have to admit, I did travel through the Maritimes at one point and heard
Mhm.
a few words here and there, which stunned me in Newfoundland,
Mhm.
um, where the Gaels I met were very, very, very nice, but they like to tease and make fun of
Yeah.
me because they once they realized I was French, they just all the jokes come out,
Mhm.
and I have to admit I really like that. Um, and of course, but in turn, the French of the islands made fun of me for being part Gaelic and by blood, and so I'm kind of both groups are wanting to make fun of me for being part of the other, which like nothing bad was meant by it. They both
Mhm.
were very very kind. They just thought it was funny,
Yeah.
which I thought was funny. But okay, so are you from the U.S. or Canada?
I'm from the U.S. Originally.
Wow.
Yeah, still
Mhm.
residing there, but right now looking into taking the leap of the PhD. So we'll see where that takes me. But uh,
Yeah, let me
yeah,
know.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, Now I will ask because I've tried Duolingo with Gaelic, but it just
Mhm.
doesn't seem to stick in my brain.
Right.
What would be your opinion on that?
Um, I use it as well. It's like purely for practice. Like the thing that, or like the issue that I kind of have with Duolingo is that it doesn't really take time to explain any of the like grammatical or like
Mm,
cultural concepts that
that's the thing.
comes with
Yeah,
language. And it's like, um,
it can't stick.
yeah, like I don't really understand how anybody could ever become fluent that way. And like I feel like that they should sort of like I don't know if they don't have this already. They should like definitely have more of a disclaimer that says like this is more of like a supplementary tool than like an actual like fully fledged language course because really uh really the best way that you're going to learn it if it's going to be by yourself is like through a um through some course that does actually take the time to explain the concepts
Yeah.
and like also the sort of like cultural understanding behind it. But um in terms of if you want to like sort of take it to like sort of like beyond books, like I know they recommended Scottish Gaelic in 12
Oh,
weeks, which is
yeah, you
like,
did.
yeah, it's like even like Gaelic educators use that as like their core textbook, both in like Scotland and in like Canada as well. But over in Cape Breton, they have I know that they changed the name, but I think they're calling themselves the Gaelic College now. They have online and in-person immersion courses, which sometimes
Mm.
it can last a weekend, sometimes it can last like a couple months, like online. Um, sometimes they'll have like summer courses and stuff, but they're a really good option, especially like if you're local to Canada,
I am.
since yeah, they since they have just so many great great instructors and just options for like not just language by itself, but also like accompanying it with like instruments or like very specific stuff around like really important Gaelic holidays like Hauna, Halloween, or Easter, as well as like a really Easter and Christmas are like really popular and important holidays as
Mm.
well that they observe and have like really specific courses for. So and also like something that's even more easily accessible is learngaelic dot scot, which is completely 100% free. Um, just sort of like website database, whatever you want to call it, that just has like pretty much everything that you could need as like a solo learner. It has like its own dictionary. It has just really specified lessons for like any level of learner, from like complete beginner to like just somebody who wants to keep fluency. And they even have like a whole archive database of this like kind of cheesy but like really helpful series of speaking your language that BBC Alpa or BBC Scotland did on Gaelic. And that's also a really great one because they actually do take the time to explain the sort of like cultural sort of norms
Stuff.
behind why they say these particular things, or like how they sort of like perceive, or like how Gaelic speakers perceive like just regular everyday things. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Fascinating. So Gaelic University and learn Gaelic dot Scott.
yeah, for Gaelic, that's
Oh,
got. Um,
okay. Well, I'm I'm back in school for a second undergrad, this time in French.
mm,
But I had thought to maybe um, rather than just stick to French, try to go the philology route and going blending from French to Gaelic, so that to try to find the similarities and try to this way I have an excuse to also take Latin and
mm,
whatnot and try to you know just have fun with the three languages and learn as much as possible because people forget how far back Gaelic goes. And one thing I thought was really neat. Well, I'm now in contact with uh, another uh, Irish speaker, Don Harper Jr. He's going to be doing the music for my radio drama for Crown of Blood, and I just simply had a private video chat with him, and he was dropping a lot of Irish terms on me and a lot of Welsh terms, and he told me he's been speaking these languages basically for his entire life. He's
wow.
over in Appalachia in South Carolina, and like it was quite interesting because um, well, yeah, it was just interesting just talking with him a few days ago. Now you, so that it's just
Mm.
it's an entire crash course in the Irish, Scottish entire thing. Um, so I will ask, where do you see this going in the next few years? Do you think? Because I've heard a lot, and I've kept an eye on the Gaelic um, Western Isles and whatnot, and how well the language is seeping in, and it seems like it's just they're expanding the education just constantly. Um, uh, and I spoke with a few Scots out there, and um, one of them, my proofreader for my gemstone book, told me he has cousins who I think cannot even speak Gaelic, and they're over like in the Highlands or the Western Isles or something. He's like they can't speak any English, and I was like, wait, how is that? Like that blew my mind. I was like, but isn't the main language essentially English or Scots or something? And he said, yeah, but there's some places they didn't really see of him. And he told me the clearances never fully seeped in. Like, there are locations that never really, it was never resolved.
Mhm.
And that, I don't know, you probably have more knowledge of that than I do. And it's just hearing from a Scotsman as well. Like, he admitted he doesn't speak any Gaelic, but this is where I'm going to have to give him your Substack because he's fascinated about learning his traditional heritage. And the only reason he agreed to read my gemstone book was because I told him it's supposed to be a more Celtic side of Scotland, although uh, I can't really say whether it's a success because it's in English. Um, and he took to it, but it's only because it was Scottish and Celtic that he even bothered to read it. I was lucky, but um, but like I said, it seems like Gaelic is growing or something. At least it seems that way to me. Um, but where do you see it going? Is it going to keep growing or
Yeah, I
decline?
mean, I would, I would hope it keeps growing.
Same.
Usually it might just be like, how the algorithms just kind of like tailor itself,
Yeah,
um,
maybe.
to like my biases. But, usually I just, see a lot of so far I've only like really seen a lot of good news about Gaelic in terms of like just what schools, like not just schools, but also like, what, government is actually doing to, help sort of like boost this, boost these language
Beautiful.
learning efforts. And, um, you'll run into a lot of people that like kind of like turn their nose up at it and stuff. But I think like, what's the harm in like, learning another language? Honestly, like I don't like
Yeah.
there's, yeah, there's a like it's not like there's any like, benefit in like closing yourself off from like, learning even
Well,
something that's not spoken in your area. But
I'll say this. I did not come in a believer into this language back in the day or have any interest in Scottish history until I saw Neil Oliver's History of Scotland. That got me interested in Scottish history. And then in there and in another documentary, I think there was a woman singing Gaelic, and that just melted my heart. So like I think the best cure for people who say, there's no point, why bother with reviving this language? Just have them sit down and listen to someone singing Gaelic. It'll it'll immediately just melt their hearts and they'll become believers, so to speak. Um, but maybe I'm biased because I just think it's a beautiful language. Um, and we have to bear in mind that, contrary to popular belief, uh, the culture of the Gaels was at the cutting edge of history and culture in the medieval period. Well, you pointed out earlier in our podcast um, that there was a large body of literature in medieval Europe that the Irish have almost more than anyone else, and this is a big deal. This should be reason enough just to learn Gaelic so that we can keep translating these documents. We can keep reproducing this stuff. It can only help people, and I'm also biased because I really want to see my translate into Gaelic, and I'd love to someday write novels in that language because I think it's fascinating.
mhm.
Um, but I'm biased, and I'm also frustrated because this thing has been testing me for years, and there's no like when I look at this, um, there's no uh, there's no English or like modern version. Like there's studies to read deletable, suppose that they be not but fable, and then sold stories that so thought fast were, and the war said on good manner. Like I'm struggling to read it, but the thing is, like, there's no easy to read version, and
Mm.
the only way to write one would be to actually read this and kind of translate. But like this is one of the most popular epic poems in history and in Scotland about the greatest British king. Like, should we just forget that language? Like, what would be lost? This wonderful poem, literature that has shaped, like, like the fantasy genre that I love so much, and I'm sure you love so much. Would it really be the same without the Celtic language and cultures? I don't. I don't think so.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like look at Lord of the Rings. Like there's like
Oh
even though
yeah,
it's not like that's even though it's not like necessarily Celtic, it's more of like a
Anglo-Saxon.
British, yeah, Anglo-Saxon um sort of, epic. Like just the idea of like language and like, the deliberate use of language is
Mm.
really important. And that's probably not or like something that like a lot of writers nowadays sort of like take for granted. So it's like, write in the language that you know how to speak. But you know what are the words that you're saying? What do they actually mean? Like why like
Mm.
like why does a writer choose like this, or like why does Tolkien choose like this specific way to word something,
Description.
yeah, or like describe something rather than like just saying it like how somebody nowadays would just like describe like a river flowing next to a tree, or like the tree itself. Like why does Tolkien go into so much detail about like
There's
just
something
yeah,
there's something almost Celtic about it.
yeah, I
What I mean
mean,
is like the obsession with the trees, and
mhm,
even like from veil to veil. Like another author might say, and he called for his banners, but to Tolkien, it's like um, from vale to vale, from glen to glen, there arose a great cry and a great cheer as the breaker of Gondolin, you know, burst open, and the Gondolindrim poured forth onto the battlefield, and their swords shone like 1,000 stars. Tolkien words it this more
mm,
poetic manner. But even like Aragorn is suddenly crowned king, and suddenly the land is beautiful, plenty, and everything goes well. That seems to me more a Gaelic or like a Celtic idea. Like, you know what I mean? The
right,
the
right,
land is plentiful because the king is the legitimate king, not
mhm,
a steward, not Sauron. You have a legitimate king at long last.
mhm,
Um, it just seems to me more like, yeah, there's King Arthur in there, obviously, but people forget that King Arthur was originally a Welsh story, and well, Don Harper takes the Southern Arthur theory, where you have, uh, I think, he was a Gaul, but there's also the alternate Northern theory where he's from Dalriada or something, or from Wales. So, like Arthur was originally Celtic, a Breton in the original stories. So Aragorn, who's very much Tolkien's Arthur, there's roots that are Celtic in there, and Tolkien never really denied it too much. The only thing he did was complain about the Gaelic language, which he didn't much like. Um, but he was fussy. Like I like him, but he
mm,
was fussy,
yeah, yeah.
fussy in
But I
that way.
mean,
That Mhm.
yeah, I mean, in all fairness, like, I think I heard you was like specifically talking about Old Irish, which, has all these like really wonderful, like, hidden sort of like conjugations or like abbreviations that just, most like grammar books don't really take time to explain, and you have to like look in really specific
Mhm.
workbooks that were written in like the 20th or like 19th century that sort of explain like this is like this word is like this verb, but it's like been changed and like abbreviated into this form. So there's a lot of quirks, and like I definitely understand his frustration after like 2 years of having to work with old Irish material myself. So
Okay. So is it like in French we have like for the plural pev, which is Peuvent, then we have per, Peux or T depending for singular. So is it kind of like that? Like
I mean,
it,
the
the
like
spelling
plural,
changes.
yeah, like the
Mhm.
spell like it changes depending on like the plural or the singular, the case as well, whether it's in like the nominative or date or dative or genitive.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm more so like referring to verbs. Verbs are where things get
Oh,
really messy.
tough. I'm French,
Yeah,
so I know all about the war of the verbs.
yeah,
It's just always everything depending on the conjugation just changes in
mhm,
everything, and it
yeah,
gets harder and harder as you go
mhm,
along. Yeah,
yeah,
and in French, the French constantly complain about their grammar. Maudit grammaire. It's
mhm,
like damn grammar.
mhm,
And I remember one old joke. At the Tower of Babel, God cursed all of humanity with different languages, and reserved a special curse for the French. That was to say their grammar.
yeah,
So they cursed them twice over.
mhm,
There was an old joke about that in my old high school,
yeah,
where it's like we're double cursed.
mhm,
We're like yeah the idea was our language is better, but we were cursed with our grammar system. It was just an old joke, like about how
yeah,
everybody hates grammar.
mhm,
Um,
yeah.
but
It's actually funny that you bring up Tower of Babel because in um, like
mhm,
the like like I guess like mythical or like at least like biblical history of like
mhm.
Gaelic. They claim that Gaelic was invented at the Tower of Babel when uh, so like the founder of the language who his name was also like Gael or like Gavel. He took like little bits from every language that was spoken there and like made Gaelic from all of those languages. Yeah,
That's pretty funny.
yeah,
Okay, I that's got me.
mhm,
Um, that has to be one of the um, funniest things I've heard in a bit. I have to admit, I don't really know much of the uh, Gaelic biblical history because I didn't bother looking into that, which is a mistake. But I know a little about the Scottish claims that they came from uh, Egypt and probably like the uh, Eastern European region because the idea was that they believed that they were descended from
mhm,
Scotia, because you've heard that medieval story of
yeah,
Scotia and what it's a very old and interesting story, but um, it's a very odd story. Um, it's one that I've begun to try to research, and it's very tricky to find the exact point of origin for this weird folklore that the Scots told about themselves. And the word Scot does come from Scotty, or
mhm.
Scottii. Did I pronounce that right? Sometimes I wonder
Uh,
about my English pronunciation.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've heard,
Scotty.
yeah, Scotty, as like I've heard that as like the pronunciation for like the Latin words. So yeah.
Oh, d'accord. Merci. Um, but but Um, as for, do you think your relationship with the linguistics and the old Irish stories, do you think it impacts your own stories?
Um, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that it has, uh, some kind that. I mean, I would at least like it to have some kind of influences that when I look for in terms of things to help inspire me, like how I write stuff. Usually, I um, tend to look at stuff that's a lot older than the sort of
Mm.
like current fiction nowadays. Uh, just because generally I don't really like to
No
imitate
one
a lot
likes,
of yeah.
yeah,
I don't really
nobody likes coming out today.
yeah, I don't really like to imitate a lot of like the styles of what is being written just because I don't really find it all that interesting. But I
Mm.
really like how how a lot of stories from um, Irish literature are told, and also like how Irish folklore are told because they can be like very straightforward at times, but also like descriptive enough that it can like hold your attention. Um, um, but obviously, I gotta kind of work with it. But one of the things I definitely really enjoy sort of bringing in is like sort of more poetic elements of it. Like one
Oh yeah.
um, aspect of sort of like Irish storytelling that I really appreciate is the idea of runs, which is sort of like a anglicization of I believe it's a round, which is sort of like this idea of like a um, almost like a mnemonic device where you'll find it in stories where there's this like aspect of like repetition or alliteration or like some kind of poetic element like in the middle of a like traditional story that's not a poem but um has sort of like I said, a poetic element that um, can be used to help, or well, could have been used to help a storyteller sort of like remember sort of like how events sort of like go in like what order, where he'll like one example I can remember is that there's a story about like a hero that encounters a giant where it's like it's describing the giant and like sort of like going into detail where it's like it's as tall as a mountain with a mouth as big as a mouth as big as a sea and like teeth as large as masts or something like that. It's like this really sort of like
Yeah,
quick kind of
I've seen
run
those
sort of
descriptions. Yeah,
yeah
they're fun.
yeah they are.
So, when it uh, now do you now I've been reading also your own reviews of various stories that draw from Celtic stories. Um, why is it that like it's how do I put it? Um, do you think that now I will ask, I have not read all your reviews, but uh, do you enjoy like seeing the that Celtic influence over a lot of modern stories or um like such as DC Comics? Because I noticed you did those reviews and I've not yet gotten to reading all of them, but just real quick, yay or nay on them.
Um, at least the ones I've read so far, or like read and reviewed. The Hound comic by Paul Bolger. That
Mhm.
I thought that was pretty good for what it was. Something that I need to definitely keep in mind whenever I do these scholarly reviews about stuff is that if I want to enjoy it as like just a regular reader of fiction, not like from a scholarly lens, I need to like sort of turn off my analytical brain, but um just because I focus so much on like details and accuracy, it's harder to do that sometimes than that I would like. But usually but usually when I do those reviews, I like to either like leave it up to the the review or like the reader who or like prospective reader who might like go off and like get it for themselves. Obviously, it's their money, it's
So
and their time, how they choose to spend it. But um, I um, I like at times I won't like I won't like try to hide my sort of I don't want to say disappointment because it's not like they're not writing this for me specifically, so it's like I can't just say I'm
Well,
disappointed,
obviously
but
not, because it'd be good if it was written for you. I'm joking.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
I mean,
joking.
yeah, but
Just some old French
yeah,
humor. Um,
yeah,
but
but
I do wonder though, like, I've got two more questions regarding
sure.
Irish literature and whatnot. Well, I consider cinema to be literature. I don't know if that's
Mm.
stupid or not, but
No, no,
um,
I would definitely agree. My myth professor in college would definitely agree with you. So yeah,
okay, good. Myth
yeah,
profs are usually really, really great. They're not like
yeah.
literature profs who are, in my experience, terrible.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but
I had a literature prof that also loved cinema, so yeah, I think
okay. Well,
great.
I went for hell with mine. Um, but for cinema, I don't know if maybe I'm wrong on this one, but why isn't there more cinema on like the Tyne or the or other pieces of Irish literature or even history or Scottish history and literature and whatnot? Because the last one that was really made was Robert the Bruce from 2019 by
Mhm.
Angus MacFadyen. He was in Braveheart. He played Robert the Bruce
Right.
in that
Yeah.
movie, and he
Hmm.
plays an older Bruce who, during after his six defeats, flees
Hmm.
into the Western Isles and disappears for a while. And you have that great story about the spider and whatnot, and it gets into all that. Um, that's really the last one that had some sword fighting, had some Scots, and had that kind of Gaelic feel. And why isn't why is it that there's not more cinema of this sort being produced? 'Cause it seems to me that it's ripe for, what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like at least when I like look or like a lot of the stories I see online about like in terms of like Gaelic revival efforts or like exposure to Gaelic and stuff. There's lots and lots of Gaelic language filmmakers, both in Ireland and Scotland. Like it just like we were talking about with it being sort of like with them being sort of like natural storytellers. That's sort of like that sort of seems to be like one of their sort of like really favorite pastimes is like making films or like visual stories and stuff. So um at least in terms of like why we aren't seeing a lot of like I guess mythic stuff is that I guess I don't really have a solid answer, but like probably like the easiest thing would be just to say like maybe difficulty of like adaptation or something. Is like maybe the right
Mm,
sort of like director who like is seeing this stuff hasn't like really necessarily like, come along and like actually like read it or is like
like,
really so um
so is there a lot of Gaelic cinema and whatnot?
I mean, there's quite a bit. Like, admittedly,
Oh.
like I haven't watched as much as I've wanted to, but the ones that I can at least name off the top of my head of stuff I've seen. There's like the Crimson Snowdrop, which is a pretty good um, Gaelic language film that does like sort of pull in like folkloric elements and was actually it was a short film. It's on Vimeo, so it's like free to watch. But it was actually like adapted into a full
15
length.
minutes.
Yeah, yeah. It was adapted into like a full length. Um, I think a sort of anthology film that is about sort of like this old Gaelic storyteller that there's a little bit more about him than like there's like meets the eye as to like how he knows all these like stories so well and such. But
Hmm.
there's there's probably a lot like a lot more like cinema or like filming that's like going on that I'm just probably not aware of. Um, I do know that there was might be on BBC Oliver, but or it might be on its own sort of like thing. But I know that there's a actually a Gaelic language or like mostly Gaelic. I think it's like Gaelic and English mystery drama called An Chelan, or like the island, which
Mystery?
or like
I
yeah,
love
yeah,
that
it's a
stuff.
yeah, yeah, it's like a murder mystery. I'm pretty sure, like some kind of like mystery thriller. So that's
Oh
that
my
happens.
god.
So yeah, yeah,
Links, my good sir. I will need links.
yeah. I'll see if I'll see where it's on, but yeah, I can definitely send that your way. But yeah, they it seemed like that their first season was pretty well done. But in terms of like other sort of like uh, in terms of like the more like mythic stuff, I think that what sort of seems to be the focus right now is that a lot of Gaelic filmmakers might be like really kind of focusing less on like the
They're building
past or
themselves
like
up.
it's yeah, they're more like focusing on like what Gaelic people are doing like right now to sort of like show the world that like, hey, we're not
Yeah,
we're not like
that's
these
fair.
like antiquated
Like
people and
the
stuff,
thing
but
is, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The thing is,
yeah,
that's how I'm. Well, I just did an article with kind of in semi coordination with John Carter because of something we discussed, and it's like authors have to build themselves up. You start with short stories, you go to novelettes and novellas, then you work your way up to single standalone novels, then trilogies. So like you don't just start off with the opera or the symphony. You got
yeah,
to work with your sonatas for a while. So
mhm,
these directors are really, at least it seems to me, like so they're doing it on really interesting topics like murder mysteries. And from what I googled a while back, horror, which is a great genre. I love
oh
horror.
yeah,
um, but this is good for building up, and this will build up capital, and people will want to watch it, and money. And then you might get something like a grander story. Um,
mm,
but I would argue animation would be a great way to present any sort of fantasy or historic fiction thing, so that if you can get the money for a fantasy, that cuts the cost by 10, uh, in contrast to an actual live action, and then you make it in Gaelic. I don't know
yeah.
if that's a crazy idea,
No, I
but
mean
that'd be how
I
I'd
mean
do it.
yeah, yeah. I mean it's possible. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the Song of the Sea or the Book of Kells. Yeah, I'm not
I'm
sure if you've
familiar
seen
with
them.
them
Yeah, yeah. I
a
mean,
little.
those are like they're in English, but like they obviously deal with like very heavily like Irish topics. And I believe that yeah, the filmmakers of that are also working on a new film. I'm not sure if it's come out yet. It's called Eru, which from what it's from the title alone, it sounds like that it's like some kind of retelling or some kind of like version of talking about like the goddess that Ireland is named after. So the yeah, so there's them of course, and you had also mentioned horror as well. There was a Irish language horror film that actually came out called An Taibhse, which is it means the ghost. I haven't seen it yet, but
Mhm.
it sounds like that it was pretty well received.
Send me
But
the link. I'll need it too.
yeah, we'll do. Yeah, I'm not sure if
I'll
it's
beg.
streaming, but yeah,
Okay, don't make me beg. I will beg.
yeah,
um, because like I said, I grew up. I only knew a few terms here and there from some of the Irish in the local community because I basically grew up in a ghetto at one point.
mm,
There were Italians, there were Irish, there were French, but the lingua franca, Francia or whatever, was French. Everybody had to speak French, but but at the same time, you grew up in this pure French community. There's still a lot. Like the second biggest population is Irish, and you hear occasional Irish terms dropped here and there.
mm,
And this is into Ontario, far away from the Maritimes, um, which I can't remember most of the terms they dropped, but must have left an impression because now, like 30 years later, I'm or
mm.
25 years later, I'm actually thinking about it. Which, um, but I I will ask, what would it take to get a Gaelic translation of one's book?
Yeah. I mean, I know that. Uh, let's see. I'm not, you know, like for my translation skills personally, I'm not at the point where I'm confident in terms of like translating entire
Mm.
novels, but in terms of like current publishers that are working with like at least in Scottish Gaelic, um, translations. I know that Beerline Press. That's I'll send the link as well, but it's
Okay.
BIRLINN. They're a publisher based out of Edinburgh, and I believe, and um, quite a number of their titles are in Scottish Gaelic and fully Scottish Gaelic, from Gaelic speaking authors. So it's probably like just written originally in Gaelic. But they're at least one of the major sort of publishing houses that I know of currently that are working with Gaelic translations, and then there's also the translation of the Hobbit on Hobbit
Which you
or
sent
a Hobbit.
me. Yeah.
That came out recently, and looking at myself, I still realize I'm at a level where I need to like try to actually gain a little bit more fluency, but you know
Mm.
yeah, and I forget which who the translator for that was, but um the like Beerling would probably be like a good place to like start for like in terms of like Scottish Gaelic books or translations. But
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't think I'd make much money off it, but it's not about money. It'd be about just the joy
Mhm.
of knowing, got my uh, Celtic books translated into the language, so that'd be a joy to know. Um, although I didn't set out to write mostly Celtic fantasy, but it seems that that's what it's becoming. I have no idea how that happened. But this is where I'll actually ask, for the sake of my fiction, because um, how would one go about pronouncing some of the names in my books? Because like I relied on more Celtic names because it's from the MacAlpin period, but
Mhm.
like let me find that the one of the Dramatis Personae at the start. Um, there's Mel Martin, or well, there's the A with that hat.
Uh,
Um,
the fada or the Strach. Yeah, so I've usually heard it pronounced mile,
Mile.
yeah, mile, or mile, moel. I think mile would be the closer pronunciation.
Mm, okay. How about the I with that
Oh, would that be like at the end before
Constantine,
sorry,
like Constantine? Constantine.
Constantine, I think, or
Constantine?
yeah, Constantine. If it would it have the accent over it or the stroke? Uh,
I think it has a stroke. It's the same one
yeah.
as over the A.
Okay. Yeah, that would be.
I'll have to.
Yeah.
I'll send you the a copy of the book.
Okay. Yeah.
Because well, like I said, I'm trying to get a radio drama produced, and I want the pronunciation of the names and of the uh, locations.
Mhm.
Like I want it to be done right. I'm not going to be able to assemble a team of Scotsmen
Right.
to or Irishmen to produce it, but I can at least try to get the pronunciations right with all the actors and just record maybe the correct pronunciation, send it to everyone who's helping with the narration so that we get as close to the Gaelic pronunciation, because we don't want to scare off the Scots and the
Mhm.
Irish from listening, because they're the target audience to
Mhm.
an extent.
Right.
Um, but uh, no, I only say that because I will admit I had hoped to get your help with that, because you know way more than I do on this stuff, and in turn I'd have to, of course, link to you and credit you for everything with that, so that I can, you know, because your scholarly research into this is just it's je n'ai pas les paroles. I don't have the words. It's important. Um, I don't know any other word. I'd say like on Substack, yours and Don Harper Jr. I don't know if you know his Substack are of such utmost importance that on a linguistic and cultural level that um, I can only dream of doing that much good for Celtic culture and whatnot. Um, so yeah, he does music which is like Celtic rock or something. That I think that's what he calls it, where he produces these very Celtic compositions, combining, from what I understand, he said classical music with some medieval Celtic music, combining them and making them into rock music. Um, uh, when the radio drama comes out, well, you'll see, like, because he's the music guy, so he's going to be producing this. But like I said, I would hope to recruit you on board for some of the, at least one or two of the voices, um, and for consultation on some of the pronunciation, because um, it would like I might end up asking you to do like at the start of every story, just or season or something, record your pronunciation and send that to everyone so that guys, Ethan says it's okay. This is the correct stuff. Like he knows all. Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd probably feel more confident about the pronunciations more so than like maybe the voice acting, but yeah, but
hey,
the
you got a good voice.
oh, thank you, but yeah, the pronunciations that I can I can definitely put my two cents in for that for sure.
Okay, thank you. Now I
Yeah.
will be honest, I can't pay, but I can at least, in the end credits say Ethan Sabatala. Here's his damn link. Go subscribe, damn you. Otherwise, it'll be war. Um, but yeah, like honestly, I don't think I'm going to title this Warrior Wednesday podcast. I gotta say, this is probably going to be something like Celtic Hour or something. Like,
Cool.
the,
Yeah,
the, thank you. This was
of course.
well. I hope to have you on board the again, because I'd love to just pick your brain and talk more about Celtic culture, even if it's like discussing like some of these Gaelic movies and um, some Celtic literature and whatnot. Um, oh, I will ask you, what are your thoughts on me kind of including France into the Celtic uh, mix?
I mean,
Is it Celtic or not?
I mean, linguistically,
More
I know
Latin?
that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like
Hmm,
linguistically, it's like closer to Latin or like the Romance language of
makes
families, but at least in the Romantic period, like it's interesting to like look at it as like quote unquote Celtic because like definitely during the like 19th century they definitely um, sort of liked to imagine themselves as being like closer to like the Gauls that like they sort of like
hmm. Yeah,
like
I know.
projected that image on themselves more so than like Romans or like Franks or like any sort of like the Germanic peoples that like would have come in and
Mhm.
mingled there. Um, and what's also interesting is that like Napoleon was a big fan of there's a lot of controversy around this, but he was a big fan of James McPherson's uh,
And he had
big
an Irish
quotation.
vision.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he had the James McPherson's O'Shane or Ossian
Mm.
um, epic poems, which turned out to be like kind of a hoax in some ways, or at least like
Yeah.
major sort of like folkloric plagiarism at
But
best. But um,
it seems it seems around that time there grew a bit of a fascination towards the Celtic heritage of
yeah,
France, which we got to bear in mind genetically. Yeah, the Frank came in, you had the Romans, but
mhm,
the Gauls never disappeared. They never died out. They
yeah,
intermingled with these groups.
right,
And so the French are descended from the Gauls, but how they perceived themselves before that was as heir to Rome during at one point in the medieval period,
mhm,
like under Charlemagne. But then you have under the well, there's also the Germanic perception that some have had over them because of the Frank. But yeah, during the some point around the turn of the 18th to 19th century, yeah, they seem to start to say, well, we're Gallic. And I've been reading some French history textbooks where they keep boasting of, we're very Gallic, we're the Gauls, we're the Gauls.
mhm,
And it's from 1954, the history books are written, and they keep boasting about that. And I thought that was interesting. And yeah, like linguistically, it's closer to Latin,
mhm,
but um, would you say that the self perception is important?
yeah. I mean, you know, I guess in terms of like
Hmm.
looking at it from like a historical aspect, it's interesting just to see how like people perceive themselves. Like nowadays, I don't really like put like a whole lot of stake in terms of like self
Yeah, I
perception or
understand.
like heritage, but yeah, it's just interesting to look like it's interesting. It's an interesting
Yeah.
aspect to look at in terms of like
Mm,
how a nation uses stories or
whatever.
history
Yeah.
from before to kind of
To
create
think
this
about.
idea of identity,
Yeah.
and sort of like how
Yeah.
they use it in their literature as it in turn. So
It's definitely very interesting because I've seen more emphasis in recent decades in even Quebec and in France on the relationship with Scotland and Ireland
mhm,
and like the Gauls, as you pointed out. And I think that this fascination with the Celtic ancestry rather than any other is very strange. And when I've talked to someone from Ireland a while back who speaks Gaelic, he actually said, um, to his mind, the French are the third Celtic nation, and that they're Celtic. They're in blood, not maybe not in language. And he said, whenever he looks at over at France, because he lives in Ireland, so he just makes occasional trips to France. He said to him, they seem Celtic
mm,
in behavior, comportment, and whatnot. But it's on the other hand, um, I've also got some people I'm following on because on Twitter I'm following these people who are from Ireland and Scotland, and I just get curious and I ask them, "What's your opinion on this weird or supposedly weird claim?" And they said, "Yeah, there's the Auld Alliance from the Bruce period. You ever heard the term the Auld Alliance?"
um, sounds familiar, but haven't like
Well, in under Philippe le Bel in 1293 to 97 thereabouts, France and Scotland basically married their nations and said, "Our
mm,
we have an ancient friendship." They forged this myth of what is it, King Achaeus or something, and Charlemagne, who were friends. There was no such king of
yeah,
Scots,
mhm,
but they founded a myth, a chivalric myth, and said, "Well, we've always been the best of friends. We're one people. Let's fight together against those blasted English." And all throughout the wars of independence of the Scottish, there were French knights bleeding into Scotland to try to fight for the Bruce, which um, I at first I didn't think that there was anything to that, but when I researched the Auld Alliance, I found primary sources where you had French knights that were in the retinue of the Bruce, um, and this apparently offended Edward because why are you say you want peace with me, but why are your knights going off into Scotland? No reason, pas raison. Um, but on the other hand, then when you look at the Hundred Years' War on the French side, the Scots keep coming into France to fight for Scotland, for
mm,
France. So this is called the Auld Alliance, like AULD, alliance. I'm just saying alliance because sorry, it's just instinct.
Mhm.
Um, but it from then on, all the way through the medieval period, France and Scotland always acted in coordination with each other. Foreign pacts, Scottish princesses would be adopted into the French royal family and then married into other royal houses. Um, and whenever there'd be foreign policy, they didn't always consult with each other, but eventually, by the time of I think it was Charles V, no Louis XI, uh, Louis XI, the Arachnid King or the Spider King,
Mhm.
would consult with Scotland. All right, these are my foreign policies. What do you think? You'd have Scotland. Well, I don't really like that idea. Well, now I got to veto my foreign policy. All right, here's this other idea. What do you think? Okay, well, I think this. Sounds good. All right, send me your daughter. I'm going to adopt her. I'm going to marry her to that guy. Okay. Yep. All right. And so it's something weird that happened. And the French of today read a lot into it. And when I've talked to some Scots and Irish, they seem to like that aspect of history. Um, and well, there's even some funny guys who are like, "Oh, the Pan Celtic Alliance. There's Ireland, Scotland, and France, and then you've got a lot of Welsh going. What about us? What about you?" You just have the Irish like, "What about you, Englishmen?" And you have the Welsh. Hold on, we're Celtic, and they are, but they're just taking the piss, I guess, out of the Welsh. But it's really, like I said, it's just the Gaul thing is. Now I'm biased, but I do ask you these questions because I'm curious about your opinion because you know far more on the cultural level than I do in a lot
Mhm.
of ways because you're fluent in the language and you this is your master's and soon your PhD. So, like I said, I just ask questions because
Sure.
I'm keen
Yeah.
to learn.
Yeah, and yeah, it also interesting that you bring up like the idea of like Celtic identity and language with France because yeah, we haven't mentioned it yet, but there is in France there's Brittany in France.
Bretagne,
There,
yeah,
yeah,
Bretagne
yeah, yeah, Bretagne, and like that's where you have a holdout of Breton speakers and
people,
like
people
yeah,
speaking.
like yeah, and originally and like up into like I think as late as like the 70s or something, like originally like Breton was like the most spoken Celtic language before Welsh, but like um, French government comes in and starts I don't know, kind of like looking down on it. Ironically,
Uh,
yeah, they didn't really they don't really treat like Breton or
they sh-
Occitan speakers very well over there, from what I've heard. But
which is not very nice.
yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
honest. Moi, je préfère le français. I prefer French. It's my native tongue. I love my culture, but I'm of the opinion the Breton language, France should be bilingual. Breton has a special place in French history. Why
Yeah,
not teach
yeah,
it in every school? Just
yeah,
bilingualize it. It's not going to divide the nation. We know that for a fact. It's going to bring it together, and the two languages will probably at some point meld into one over the centuries. Um, Likely, Français will just absorb the other. But if you claim to be a Celtic people, you shouldn't be mistreating the Celtic language of the region. You know what I mean?
mhm,
I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, and if you want Bretagne to stay in France and not seek independence, I just think treat it better and like treat the people well.
yeah,
Like these days, the Scots treat the Scottish Gaels really well, and the Scottish Gaels are happy to stay in Scotland. I don't know if it's just me, but like if you want people to stay, treat them well. If you want to push them out, well, treat them like garbage. But I don't like the French government for the most part, but
mhm,
I have no power for that.
yeah,
But all I know is I'm going to try to master Gaelic so I can pass it down to my kids because I love that language. But thanks for coming on board. It was
of
really fun.
course.
Hopefully next time we'll speak about Celtic, like a Celtic story or something that you like, and That might be more than an introductory thing.
Sure.
Okay, I would really like that. I'll send you. Wait, I'll need your email or Discord or something, um, in order to send you what I've got for my story because, like I said, I'll need the um, pronunciation so I could send it out to some voice actors just so that I know, we've got this
Mhm.
hammered out. Otherwise, it's going to be a terrible production. Um, and I do mean that. It'll be terrible because pronunciation and linguistics are important.
Great.
Um, but, anyways, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having
How
me
would I
on.
say thank you in Gaelic?
Well, the simple, informal way is topolet. If you want to get formal about it, you can say topolave. But if you want to say like, many thanks, then you can say mod and tank.
Let me see that. I'm just going to Google that. I'm visual. So tapath layat,
Topolet, topolet,
tapalayat,
topolet.
tapalayat,
Yeah,
tapalayat, um,
topolet. Yeah.
tapalayat. I'll work on that.
Mhm.
Um, so until next time, I'll encourage everyone, and uh, as soon as well, I'll be putting it on YouTube, but also when I go to download this, I'll be putting the link to Ethan's Substack in the comment section, and on Substack it'll be, well, right there in the podcast. Do subscribe to him. Um, his Substack is very educational. If you want to know anything about Celtic culture, language, history, literature, I mean, he's a great writer. Check it out. I cannot recommend Ethan Sabatala's Substack enough. Um, Easily, like, probably one of the top 10 Substacks out there, just easily. So check him out.